Hi, my name's Kayleigh and I'm an arts tutor for South Lanarkshire Leisure and Culture. Today's acrylic class we're going to be looking at a landscape. So we've already done our still life and today we're going to look at some more depth and tone and using your colour mixing to create a really nice landscape. So here's a little example. It's going to look something like this, where we've got our background in a more muted palette and our foreground is going to be nice and bright and lively with a couple of little sheep in there as well. I'll talk you through it step by step. It's reasonably straightforward and it's one of these ones you can either spend hours and hours on it or you can have a lovely painting after about an hour as well. Let's get started. With our landscape, I've chosen this picture of a lovely hillside, a little sheep on it. It's got a really nice kind of muted background where the colour's pared back, whereas this colour at the front is really bright and vibrant, which is what we're looking for in a landscape picture, just to show the depth in your painting. Using acrylics, we've done a few different things before, and the same principles apply. So we can still colour block in, where we're putting in our main colours everywhere and then build up on top of that to get our texture, like for example on the grass. And yeah, just using the same amount of maybe watering down some of your acrylics if you want more of a wash going on, but not too much, or using it really thick. The sheep are a really good example of what you could actually do impasto, like we did with our fish, where we used a palette knife or even just a really thick brush to get some nice texture and make our sheep really stand out. But today what we're mainly going to be focusing on is getting the background look nice and kind of dull in comparison to our vibrant foreground, and then some nice textures. We've got really good tones. There's so much green in there that we can work with. We've got some green, some yellow, a little bit white, a little bit of brown, and the blue as well. So it's a really limited palette, but the amount of green shades that we can get out of that is going to work really well. So first off, let's just mark it in. I've got a pencil here just to roughly put in where all our lines are going to go, just to help your painting. So I'm going to start with this middle line kind of going across. I think that'll just help sort of anchor everything on the page. It goes across like this. And it's just over halfway up the picture. And we've got our little path coming up. Just try and imagine it as if the sheep aren't there just now. And just take your time getting all the pencil marks where you want them. Sometimes by the time you reach the other side of the page, something's moved slightly off kilter, which you'll need to change. I'm quite happy with where everything is. It's more important to get everything sort of roughly marked in here, but more important when it's the paint. Your pencil's just to guide you a little bit. So if it's not spot on, don't give yourself too much of a hard time about it. Bring that down a little bit. And the good thing is your acrylics will go right over the top of your pencil, so you can make as many mistakes as you want and it's not going to show through. But lots of kind of spare land over here. However much detail you want to go into, feel free, because it's personal preference on whether you like to show where all your darker colours are going to go. You might want to mark out where these really dark bits are. You might want to just roughly have everything in and do the rest with the paint. I'm not going to bother too much with my sheep just now. Again, if you want to mark them in just now, it probably does no harm, but what I'm going to do is just paint my background in and then we can actually go in over the top and mark out where our sheep are going to go on top of that, because they're going to be one of the last things you want to do. One thing that's important, I should have mentioned it before, you don't want a glow around things. So if you were to draw your sheep in just now and then do your background, you might end up with a white sort of line around it where you've tried to avoid painting in the sheep. So if we paint our background first, it stops any of that happening. We're going to do our colour blocking. So our colour block is where we've got just the main colours put in, and then we'll put our more textures and colours on top. So for my sky, I've mixed my blue, my green and a little bit of white. See where that takes you. You might want to add in a wee bit more white if you want it lighter. A bit more blue if you're... Okay, it depends what blue you're using as well. I've got an ultramarine blue here. See, I quite like that. It's quite a chalky colour, but personally, I quite like it. If you find it's not going on well enough, you can add a little bit more water to your brush. But try and avoid putting too much on, or it'll break down the particles of the paint. Don't want too much. Now, I'm using a big brush for this because I want it to be as smooth as I can too. I'm just going back and forth to try and get the paint going in the same direction, because the sky is really, really smooth in this. It's probably a little bit lighter than that as well. So if you wanted to add in a wee bit more white, you can actually just do that on the page. I'm just going over the top of my mountains now. It's better to do that than to have your white glow, like I mentioned before. Here, so it's actually got a lovely gradient in it, so because I've added the white on after and on the page, the white is blended really nicely with the rest of the sky. It's given it a bit of a moody day. This actually looks a lot brighter, but I'm going to leave it like that just now. We'll put in the hills and let's see where that takes us. A lot of art in painting is experimenting with colours and seeing what works for you. Seeing how the mix goes. If you've only got a few colours as well, I think it's important to learn how to use those quite well, rather than struggling. You will be able to do it. So for the sea, I'm trying to make it a little bit darker. Now a bit more green. It's definitely got some green shining through. Maybe a bit more. Oh, it's really dark. I'll do a bit of white in. And the good thing with acrylics is you can just go over the top. So if it's not looking the way you want it to look, just stick another layer on it. If it's not spreading as well as you hoped, a little bit of water, just to help it go a bit further as well. Okay. So that's me got my sky and my sea in, just for colour blocking. Again, remember this isn't necessarily your final colour. This is just to get the main colours on the page, get rid of that white paper. Now for our background here, I'm actually going to fill most of it in just with the brown, because this bit is really, really dark, and then we've got our green on top, and this bit over here is brown as well. Now I don't have a black on my palette here, because I do think sometimes adding black can just be so dark. So I try and get away with just using brown if I can. And then if I need to make it darker and I need to get black, then I will. I'm just going to mark it in the brown just now. Look at this bit coming down. Might want a smaller brush than I'm using just now. I'm not bothered too much about preciseness because it is our colour block. And I'm just taking it right the way along. Again, we'll come back and add some more details in it, but for now, got a brown area, and I'm going to put some green on top as well. It'll look quite funny just now, but I promise it'll come together. Your painting's all a bit layering, so the more layers you add in, the more texture you're going to get. So you're going to see the kind of layers of the paint shine through the colour and with your brush strokes. Some of the greens actually melded in with the brown, which has worked quite nicely. I've got a wee bit of a, see this white bit under here? It's almost like a white glow where I've not quite taken the paint down far enough. So I'm just going to fix that in the colour block just to avoid that shining through in our next layer. We want rid of all white page, and this is a white area. Much better. Now we've got some really large areas of green, and it's quite a light yellowy green. So when you're mixing any sort of green, your two primary colours, your blue and your yellow, make green. And if you want it to be more of a yellowy green, add more yellow. If you want it to be more of a bluey green, add more blue. If you want to mix your own green from the start, then feel free to just use those two colours. Or you can just use, this is a sap green I've got here, which I think will work quite well, mixed in with a little bit of yellow. If you're looking to make your green a lot lighter, then definitely use yellow rather than white. White works, but it can make it really pastel shade. You can see my sky's got quite a pasteliness to it. I don't know if pasteliness is the word, but it's quite pastel shaded, where you're going chalky almost. Whereas if we're adding yellow to this instead, it keeps its vibrancy, it keeps that green shining through, but it's just a lot brighter and lighter. I'm adding quite a lot of yellow into this now. I quite like how bright it's gone, like a lime green. That's lovely. I love a vibrant painting. I'm very much for turning it to the colours that work for you as well. The main thing we want is this to be really bright compared to our background. So let's just mark this in just now. You can add our darker bits in after. Maybe went a wee bit wild on the yellow actually. I'm okay with that. The main thing is we're just getting rid of that white page. I'm not too bothered about my brush strokes for this bit because the grass does go in all different directions. There we go, got our main green in. At this stage you can add some darker bits in if you want to go just in with your green over the top and start putting in where some of the darker areas are. Feel free. But don't get too caught up in it. This is just a colour block. Some darker bits down here as well. And it can be really rough right now. This is the joy of this. Try and relax into the looseness of it, of just sticking the paint on. Because when it gets to the precision, you won't have this kind of opportunity to just go for it. Let's go dark. Just get a little bit of paint on there, just to get rid of our white. It seems a wee bit ridiculous just now, but it does make a difference at the next stage. You're not trying to cover that really stark white. Okay. Now we've just got our path area here. The path's a bit of a funny colour because the sun's shining on it. The way the sun's, I don't know if it's sunrise or sunset, but it's definitely got a yellow glow over everything. So it's quite a yellowy path, a little bit of brown. So I want you to just experiment with the colours you've got just now. I'm going to start with some brown. If you've got like a lemon yellow, cadmium yellow, mix those in, see what it turns out like. If you've got a yellow ochre, maybe try that as well. And use your palette just to mix these up. You might want a wee bit of white in it. That might turn out a wee bit too chalky. Don't know if that's the look you're going for. A wee bit more brown. The yellow ochre's working quite well for me. But your other yellows will work good as well. That's quite nice actually. It's quite warm. I'd say that lime green's quite cool. It's definitely got a coldness to it, so actually this warm path is quite nice. Quite dark. Again, not too bothered where my brush strokes are going at this point because it is kind of stony, like a stony path. But I am trying to get rid of all the white bits. So you can't actually see this much of the path, but in a bid to get rid of some white, I've managed to take it up a little bit further. You can add some more green in if you need to. Okay, now stage 1 is done. We've done our colour blocking, we've got a main colour right over it. If you've drawn it in correctly and you've painted it incorrectly, you should have some sort of perspective going on here where you've got the path really large at the start, getting smaller towards the end. If you have got all your kind of really straight line for our C here as well, that makes all the difference of getting that background pushed back. So if it's not dry already, let it dry for a little bit. And next up we're going to get in with a little bit more detail. So I'm going to use a smaller brush. With your brushes, we've got lots of different kinds you can use. We've used them throughout the sessions. For this one, I'm thinking about using these two here. So these two are really coarse brushes. They're really, really kind of thick bristles, and it gives you a really, really good kind of scraping of your paint. So it means you can get this texture for the grass. So I'd be tempted to use one of these. It will work normally just with a softer brush. You just have to maybe work a little bit harder at it, but you can still get some really good texture going on with these as well. So yeah, I'm going to get stuck in with the grass first off because I'm most excited about that, and we can go back to our background afterwards. I think you see more of the foreground, so if you can spend a little bit more time on it. So for this grass, I'm going to take a good helping of yellow, good helping of green. Mix those together. And now let's get into it. Let's really, really look at where our detail is going to go. Using our brush almost stippled, and just in different directions, being quite rough with it. Gets you a really nice texture going on. I think we need a wee bit more yellow in that. And it's adding an extra layer to your painting with this texture going on. And it won't look much at the start, but see, the more you build this up, it's amazing how every little stroke starts to come through. And when you're painting a photograph, you're painting your own representation of something. You're not painting, you're not necessarily getting something that's photographically exactly the same. You've got a photograph there if you want it to look like that. But what you're trying to do is create a piece of art of this, so you really have the license to go as far as you want with how many different textures and colours come through.
So you can start to see this starting to work a little bit. You've got the kind of lighter yellows coming through for this bit. Actually going to go even more yellowy for up here. And you can smooth off this line. If you go outside, you can see I've gone over my C a little bit here. You can smooth that off afterwards once it's dry with your C, so don't worry too much. It's better to get the texture in than to have a whole area with no texture because you'll be frightened to go in the C. If you've got a yellow ochre, it might be quite nice to try and introduce some of that. Over here it's quite golden. So your yellow ochre is quite a goldy colour. I'm just working my way along, trying to figure out where all my goldeny bits are now. Get these in. I'm just sort of stippling them in. Not being too precious about the painting so far. I'm going to add a wee bit more green on top of some of these bits just to blend them in. And I tend to dart about my paint, as you can probably tell. I'm over here and then I'm over here. Get it the way you want it. A bit brown in there because that's quite a dark bit. Quite a dark bit up here as well. And if you're wanting a darker green, try mixing your green and your blue together. I went a wee bit far with that there, it was too much blue. And if you do need to wash your brush in the middle, give it a really good dry because you want your paintbrush to be quite dry for this part. Go back in with some of your lighter areas. And it's just looking back at your photo and seeing what do you need more of. I think I need more yellow up at this bit. I want it to be a lot brighter. There's even some really big yellow bits kind of coming down here. And I'm doing all this with quite a big brush just now. I will move on to a smaller brush at some point. Once I feel like I've done enough of the sort of larger areas, then we will go into a little bit more detail. If you've got a sponge, sponges work quite well for this. Get a nice texture with that too. I'm just going over some of the browny bits to sort of blend them in. And bring some more yellow down at the front here. Now you can see my brush is looking a wee bit worse for wear. I do tend to keep certain brushes just for this sort of thing. Next week's lesson we do a similar technique. I call it my scabby brush and I just use that for certain things. never again to be used for detail. Okay, now I feel like I've got a wee bit more texture going on. This is like layer 2. This is the second layer that's gone on. We've now got even more texture on our grass. This is still the larger brush, and the next stage is to go into our smaller brush. Just trying to make sure I've gone right up to the edge of the path here, because I don't want it to look like there's nothing there. It's getting a bit white. Okay, give my brush a good wash. And you can sort of reshape it back into how it once was. Okay, now while I let that dry, now's our chance to go into our background again. The background, I'm quite happy with my sky, how that's looking. It is darker than the picture, but actually I think it works quite well with the sea. So it's up to you. If you need to go over yours again to make it a little bit lighter, you can. Even if you're just wanting to add in this sort of more white kind of coming through, then please do. I'm going to mix a slightly darker green with a blue, and try it with a wee bit of blue, and I'm going to mix a green with a brown as well, just for this background. You can even add a wee bit of white in if you feel like it's looking too bold. Maybe you need to pare it back a bit. That's actually quite a nice colour. So I've mixed sap green, burnt umber and white together, and I'm quite happy it's like a mossy green here, which I'm going to use in my background. So I'm using a smaller brush this time, and we can see we've got kind of darkness, got brown and darkness coming down here, and then right on top we've got a really light part of a light green in there, so we'll go in and do that bit last. But right now, just using your brush, get in with a little bit of detail. I quite like, while one of my colours is still a wee bit wet, going in with different colours on top, so you can then go in with your brown over the green you've just put on, and you might end up with some nice blends. So it's a great way to practice blending your colours on the page rather than on the palette. Obviously you've blended a lot on the palette already, but you get this smoothness going on, definitely a lot smoother. If you add a little bit of blue with your brown, it'll make your brown darker as well. So ultramarine blue and burnt umber make a sort of dark grey colour. You can see that darkness shining through now. I'm going to mix quite a lot of that, I think. That works quite well. Look how dark this bit is. I'm going to go in a wee bit more brown in there. It's a wee bit blue looking. The colour mixing is just practice and practice and practice. So if you find something's too blue, then if this one's too blue, you're adding more brown. If it's too brown, you're adding more blue. Got a wee hint of green in it as well, that's really nice. And if you do what I do, I've made a mistake, I've gone into my sea a little bit. The good thing with acrylics is you can just paint over the top. Just getting it really dark right down there. And this bit over here is really dark as well. I'm just going to take a finer brush to get more of a flat line just at the top here, because you don't really see too many rocks from that far away. And use your brushes to your advantage, whatever you've got there. Just use whatever suits you. You might find you prefer a much smaller brush to get those fine details. If you prefer to work loose, you might prefer a bigger brush. So I'm just going over the outline of my hill here, just to get it a bit, gone out again. So I've darkened that right down now. If you feel it's too dark, you can always go back in with a lighter brown on certain bits, or you can put your light green. There are some bits that will sort of stick out too. It's not all going to be solid. I'm just putting in a brighter green at the top here. Now it's quite light actually, I might add a wee bit of white. See what that looks like, a wee bit of white and lots of green, and a touch of brown. I quite like that green, that's quite nice. You'll find that you'll make some that work and some that don't as well. So if it's not working, just a remix. That's a wee bit bright, that one. I'm going to dull it down with a wee bit of brown. And you can go as far as you want with this. If you want it really close to the image, then go into loads of detail. If you're just looking for more of a representation of what you're doing, then something like what I've got just now is probably enough. You probably don't need to add too much more, to be honest. I feel like this is a wee bit dark. This bit over here is just a little tiny bit dark. I'm going to go in with a bit of brown over the top of some of it. I'll do a bit of texture. There you go, so a little tiny bit of lighter brown on top makes all the difference there. So looking at our picture and what we've got, I've kind of lost where my hills are a little bit, so I'm just going to mark in where these are. The good thing about them is that they're all kind of like, this one especially here is highlighted in the yellow, or kind of light yellow green. So I'm going to mix my light yellow green again. Just marking where that goes. And you don't need full coverage, so you can still see some of my textures coming through, which is lovely. Already done some of the hard work for myself here. The second layer. Just going over it until I kind of get the line that I'm looking for. May not get it right first time. I think mine's is maybe a wee bit high up. If you need to smooth off any lines as well, you might have some up here towards your C. You just need to smooth off a little bit, so good chance now to kind of get that in. And they're really like subtle lines. There's hardly anything to see them by, but again, when they dry in, it's like layers on top of one another. You start to see those hills coming through. Most hills will be like bright on the top, and then they'll have a darkness behind them. So when we mark in the darkness as well, it'll make all the difference. Quite happy with where this is going just now, but it's like a constant moving things around. And sometimes you just get a line that'll just work. It'll just be great. Embrace them when you get that. Really embrace them, because it feels like such an achievement, because you think, oh, got it. It's worked really well. My palette always ends up a little bit of a mess when I'm working with lots of different greens, because I do quite like them just sort of all melding into one another. I'm putting in a wee bit of darkness just behind where some of the hills are. It just helps things bring them out. So you can use your darkness as in a dark green, or you can use more of a brown. I would actually say there's quite a lot of brown in the picture, so yeah, so it's up to you. Brown will add a wee bit of warmth as well to some of the greens, and less bold. You can even add in, like if you've got a wee bit of yellow ochre as well, sometimes that can make a really nice sort of grassy colour. But over here's really dark. Dark bit over here as well. And the more that you add in, the more it's going to be like the image. You can definitely see where the hills are starting to form now. You might have thought it was a bit mad before, nothing was really happening, but it does eventually get there. And different brushes create different textures, so have a play about with them, see what works with your painting. You might find if everything's looking too stippled, you don't necessarily want that. You maybe want some more smoothness going over the top, a little bit like what's going on just now. And it just breaks it down a little bit. and it's just building up the layers. Please remember to look at this from afar as well. So up close you might think, my paint's just not looking the way I want it to, but you'll be so surprised when you look at it from a distance and you start to see, oh, those little tiny paintbrush strokes make all the difference. Mine's is definitely more not abstracted, but it's quite expressive. Kind of say it's expressive because it's not necessarily a photographic copy, but it's a painting representation. A wee bit goldy. And mixing on the page and mixing on the palette is fantastic practice for that. So you're kind of working out how you work with your paints. Do you like to blend as you go? Do you like adding on different ones on the paper and just seeing what happens, or do you prefer being more controlled about it and knowing what colours are going to go on before you put them on? Everyone's slightly different. I think personally I actually prefer mixing on the page and just hoping for the best sometimes. Just going to get a lot more lightness up here. Needs a wee bit more yellow going in. I'm going to stop on my grass for, because I could spend hours on that. We're going to do a little bit more in the path, get a little bit more texture on there. I'm going to make it a lot lighter probably than it is just now. Use a wee bit of water this time. And I'm mixing my yellow ochre and my white. Maybe need a wee bit more brown in there. And you can sort of, this is mark making, so what you want to do is explore how your paintbrush can work. Lots of different marks on top of one another. Let's try a slightly darker one on top of that. Slightly darker on top of that as well. And I've just layered, that's a couple of colours I've layered up. I want it to be a wee bit lighter up the top here. It's definitely lighter up there. And go a little bit lighter here as well. There's some bits you want darker too. I would say it's definitely a bit darker down at the front. Not thinking about the sheep shadow at the moment. We've got a darkness in the middle. Now the benefits of what I've just done, I probably work quite fast there, so please feel free to pause the video if it's a wee bit fast, but using all the different colours and just layering them on top of one another as you go, it gives you that texture coming through without having to do too much like individual work. Just imagine trying to get every little bit of detail in there, so working quite fast is quite good fun, and it just stops when the paints are still wet, so they will blend lovely together. I'm going to stop there. I'm quite happy with how that's gone. I have noticed though I do need a wee bit more yellow just going around the side here, so I'm just going to grab a bit more paint. Just kind of work that in. There we go. And just make sure it blends into the rest. That's a wee bit of a tip when you go in and put stuff over the top. It can sometimes mess everything else up, so definitely try and give it a wee bit of a blend. Now, just kind of taking a step back and having a look at this, you can tell that this is background, it's a lot darker, it's a lot more muted, whereas your front is a lot brighter. You've got these sort of bright colours coming through. Compared to the picture, mine's probably more green than yellow. I would say probably still need even more yellow in, but I'm going to go on and show you how to do the sheep. And then you can add more yellow as you go. It is a bit of a moving feast with it. You do just want to keep adding more and more little bits here and there, and different textures on top, different brushes, and a sponge or nail brush or anything you can find around the house can work really well as well. So for the little sheep, you can actually draw on top of your acrylics. You can just almost mark in where your little sheep are going to go. Sheep have got a lot bigger ears than you expect. Make sure you get the size of ears in. Okay, one little sheep drawn. You can add in however many of these as you want. If you want them all in, they're reasonably set up. Mine's actually a wee bit big. We'll say mine's is a little bit closer. But even if you've got little smaller ones up the back here, like this one, you know, you can hardly see too much detail. You just see it eating a bit of grass. Maybe even a few up here. Wee trick is draw an odd number of them. If you've got lots like that, it doesn't really matter because you've got so many. But if you're only drawing a few, draw an odd number. Might have gone through this a wee bit before, but the human mind loves odd numbers, so people will be more attracted to your painting if you've got an odd number of sheep in it. Weird, but true. Right, I'm going to take a smaller brush this time, and if you look at the colour of your sheep, it's tempting just to go in straight with the white, but they're definitely a lot more yellowy. One, with the sun shining on them, and two, just because they'll be a wee bit mucky as well. Sheep are never normally bright white. So you can mix a little bit of brown in, you can mix a little bit of yellow. Yellow ochre works really well, I would say. Add a wee bit more in there. And I'm just going to paint in the whole lot. I know some of it's a bit darker, but again, it's almost like colour blocking. I'm just going to put in right over the top. Now, depending on the quality of your paints, you might need a couple of layers on here, and depending on how much water you use in your mix as well. If you can, try and get away with not using too much water, as you'll just end up with multiple layers. And get the back sheeps in. So depending how smaller brush you've got, this will be a wee bit easier. I could probably do with a smaller brush, to be honest. I've also got little hair sticking just out, move that out of the way. This is adding foreground to your painting, which is going to make it more attractive to people looking at it as well. People love animals and things too. So you're starting to see you've now got your background, you've got your midground, you've got your foreground, you've got a real focal point in your picture too. If you want to add darkness, again you can use a little bit of black if you feel like you need it to get that darkness in, or this one's face as well is definitely a lot darker. But if you can get away with less of that, I'm just marking in where my shadows go. You can even add a wee bit of blue if you feel like it's too browny and you want it darker. Try adding a little bit of blue to it like we did before. And that's a bit closer to what I'm looking for. Now, while that's still a little bit wet, I'm going to go back in with my lighter colour now as well. And just try and get a wee bit of a blend going on. This is your second layer, so I'm starting to get the fluffiness of the sheep now. We have some whiter bits coming through. So just like I did before, got a wee clump of paint. Just mixing in the lightness while the paint's still wet. It looks so well. I need some more definition, like in between where like the legs end and the stomach starts. Just a wee bit darker in there than you can. I'm just going to get a bit of a darker colour for the eyes and ears again. And sort of mouth here, maybe a wee bit brown, but there's a wee bit more white just at the top here. And again, look at it from afar because it will look different when you see it far away and when you see it close up. You don't always need as much detail as you think you do. Add in a wee bit of a lighter face up here. Now because I've done that base layer that's got a little bit of a kind of yellow ochre and brown in it, and I can get away with putting a wee layer of white on my sheep, and it just brightens them up a wee bit. Definitely need a better brush because it's got a wee bit on it that's messing up my sheep a bit, but I'm sure yours will be much better. So remember your shadows as well. You will have some shadows coming out from underneath your sheep. On the path, definitely quite dark. Coming up here as well. If you find like it's looking too dark, and I would say mine's a wee bit too dark just now, then you can go over the top with a little bit of green just to sort of pare it down a little bit. But while you're doing that, you can go it back in and get any other little hills that you need. You might have some darker bits that you start to see now that you think, oh, I'm going to just darken that up a little bit. Or lighten them up as well, if you've got more yellow you want to add in. You might want to fix your sea as well if there's any like little bits in your sea that you need to do. I'm going to just mix a little bit of a blue and a green. Try and get that colour again that I had before. Remixing is the worst, trying to get the same colour. Okay, now I'm going to get some nice crisp lines in. Yeah, I'm okay with my sea like that. There are some sort of darker bits that kind of come down the bottom here, so if you wanted to try and darken that down, you can. Again, while it's still wet, that'll help you get that sort of ombre shade going on. So I think we're nearly ready to call it a day. I could spend hours on this. This is a painting that takes a long time because you can always add in more details here and there. But hopefully that's given you kind of good place to go with it. Spend a bit of time, see when you feel like you're ready to stop with it too, because you'll know better than anyone when you think, right, my sheep's looking good, my background's looking good, I've got all the grass the way I want it as well. There we go, get a wee bit of shadow in. Darken that one up too. If you want any other shadowy areas, it's always good to do those at the same time. So you've got like round about the grass there, even a wee bit up here. It's always good to sort of match in some colours. And just darken these down too. Just be bold with it. It's kind of hard to do that, but last little bit. Add a little more green here. Oh, I could faff about this page, so I'm going to stop. So yeah, I hope yours looks good as well. Just once you've finished, take your masking tape off and you'll have a nice little border coming around it as well. So just make sure you peel it away from your painting. Let's stop the paper ripping. And it's amazing how different that looks without the kind of stippling of the grass and things as well. There you go. I hope you enjoyed.
Thanks for joining me today doing our landscape with our little sheep. I hope you enjoyed it, and from that you'll have learned lots about tone and depth in your painting, and next week we'll go on to take that even further with a different landscape painting.